So for our next talk, we have the very, very smart team from Appnovation. Please give a warm round of applause to Steve Peretz and Ashley Fitzgerald from Appnovation, who are going to talk to us about how to unblock your team by delivering value and capturing and socializing the right data. Appnovation, Steve Peretz and Ashley Fitzgerald.
Just going to check the mic. People can hear us, right? All right. Thank you for pronouncing my name correctly, by the way. That's great. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm Steve Peretz, and I lead digital health product strategy at Appnovation.
And I'm Ashley Fitzgerald, and I head up our data and analytics practice.
So quick about us as a company. We are a global digital partner with a specialty in creating digital health products. So think websites, apps, and data products. And what we've noticed is to execute these extremely well, data has been the lifeblood of what really informs what our recommendations are and what the enhancements should be. So we want to start with a fun clip here for you of what would happen if we don't listen to the data and we don't have the right responses for people. The quick bit of context on this is that this is a chatbot aiming to help people with mental wellness.
We gave Woebot a try to see how it would respond to a mental health issue that affects roughly 18% of the adult US population.
Super anxious and can barely sleep. He responded, I can't wait to hop into my jammies later.
Well, that's unsettling.
All right. So unfortunately here, right, they either didn't have the data to know what people were looking for, or worse, they did have the data and they chose not to or were unable to act on it. And then the end result there is someone's reaching out for help, and then the product, which ultimately is a representation of the company, failed them. There we go.
So today, we're going to talk to you about some of the common challenges that we see in the pharmaceutical industry with the way that data is being leveraged, and also provide you some tips and frameworks that hopefully you can take back into your daily roles as a thank you from us to you for staying for the afternoon. So first is building with a purpose and purposely building. So one of the things that we see across organizations when we're building these products is that oftentimes individuals and teams don't have a clear sense of what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. On top of that, there's often a disconnect between the business objectives and the actual need state of the patients or the HCPs that we're building for. An example of this is we recently worked with a pharmaceutical company that had created a companion app with the goal of improving patient adherence. And they were actually very successful in terms of the downloads. So they got over 100,000 downloads for the companion app, but they had less than 3% of users that ever returned. So obviously the app was not providing the utility that the patients needed to actually drive that adherence. So since we've seen this so much, we developed a framework that ties together corporate objectives with the patient or HCP journey to identify the appropriate product, KPIs, reporting structure, and optimizations. So a great example of when this has been done really well is another pharmaceutical company that we worked with, and they came to us because they had a treatment that had a very long sales cycle. So on average, it was taking an HCP 3 months to write a prescription. So they wanted to shorten that consideration phase. So what we were able to do was analyze their website data, and we identified HCPs at a one-to-one basis and then tied the website behavior with claims data. So we actually were able to create a model that identified 4 key actions on the website that could predict a future prescription being written. From there, we added 2 additional touch points into the consideration phase, where when an HCP would come to the site and take one of those actions, we automatically sent them an email and then sent their information to one of our field reps who would contact them within 24 to 48 hours. Ultimately, this resulted in a 2-week decrease in the average sales time, which was extremely significant for our business. On top of that, kind of an ancillary benefit to this entire exercise was that teams became more motivated once they understood what their role was and how that actually drove the business forward. So I had developers that were reaching out to me to understand how much sales were coming through the website. So it's a great ancillary benefit when everybody really knows how they're contributing to your business and moving patient outcomes forward.
Okay, so that's how our framework works successfully on the HCP side. And I think you'll see from this stat, we all know that on the patient side, it can be very challenging. We want to measure success, but how do you measure success of a program if you don't really have very much patient data to go on? 80% of patients don't want to provide their data, which sounds very grim, but there's actually a lot of hope because 70% would actually provide that data if you gave them value, if you gave them a reason to provide that data. So we want to take you through 3 of our favorite tips of how you can actually design solutions to get patients to want to give you that data. And the first starts with something where we helped one of our core clients on progressive disclosure. So the act here is rather than asking someone right up front on a website or an app or any kind of digital experience, rather than asking them to go through some very long registration process, we started with one question. We just wanted to know, what is it that you might be interested in? Select a health challenge. And then just based on that one piece of information, we were very transparent in offering, if you give us that information, we're going to personalize the content and the experience that you're going to get out of it. The next, and this has been talked about a lot yesterday and a little bit today, is people really want answers, especially in healthcare. So you don't have to have all of the answers, but if you can be transparent about if you provide a question or if you provide us this type of data, we will provide answers for you, people are much more likely to engage. And then the last, which we're not seeing often enough yet, but it is a very important trend, is you've probably all heard behavioral economics. Social norms is one of the best principles within behavioral economics. So think Google reviews and Yelp. And what ZocDoc did, and you're probably familiar whether it's ZocDoc or another, is there's a lot of anxiety in figuring out who you should choose as a provider. So you can go see patients who are like you in your region, what others have to say about that doctor so you can make a more confident decision. And then the last thing here to highlight, which it's not a social norm, but it is a really good practice, is they're pretty successful at getting someone's insurance information. And the reason for that is they say, hey, we'll provide a list of who's in network for you if you tell us who your plan is.
Next, we're going to talk about making the right assumptions to drive the right strategies. So another thing that we see quite often across different organizations within pharma is that there's flawed assumptions that create the wrong strategies. And so one great example of when this happened to us with one of our clients is that they came to us thinking that the biggest issue they were having with one of their treatments was that their patients were switching to a generic. However, when we analyzed the claims data, we actually found that the biggest issue was that patients were deciding not to enter into treatment at all. So they had created an entire marketing strategy around switching, when the reality is they should have been marketing to people to actually convince them to begin the treatment in the first place. So when we went to them with that insight, the train had very much left the station. And one thing that's relatively unique about the pharmaceutical industry is the level of socialization that happens within your companies. So there's so much socialization that happens that once you move into the execution phase, it's very, very difficult to get the train back into the station, reassess, and operate in a more agile way. So they went to market basically with a strategy trying to solve a problem that they didn't have. So we call it the multi-million-dollar mistake, which inspired us to create something for our clients that would help them to avoid that. So we call it the value index.
So we're going to take you through how that value index comes to life and how we triangulate data. To this point about that Ashley's making about the train leaving the station, it kind of really well illustrates how agile actually gets put into practice. So I'm not sure how many of you out there take on patient interviews and user testing, but we really want to illustrate the importance of it through a form of transparency. Like we, as a very proud design and technology company, will have our own accidental bias. And when we ran user testing, We went in for an app that was for an elder population, and we created within the app a search functionality, and we used a magnifying glass to represent search. Does anyone have an idea of what people said when they saw that as an elder population? What happened was they yelled at us and said, "Is that GPS? Are you spying on me?" So that's the kind of information you would never get from analytics. It's just not going to be there. We only found that out through user testing, right? So that's just one component, though, because if you do that in isolation, you can get some great insights, but understandably, as global pharma organizations, you really need a little bit more scale to make sure that any insights, as Ashley tells our team all the time, it's not a hunch. It's not, just like going with your gut. So we actually do quite a bit beyond that. And often within 2 months, we can get the results, not only from patient interviews, but we'll also run website surveys, get responses from that or existing analytics. And then lastly, social listening. Because is there sometimes a conflict between what you're seeing on social listening versus what you're hearing in the interviews, and you want to make sure that you have those results. So last point here is to bring that to life for one of our clients that focuses on oncology. We went in with the understanding that we were going to design something that supported financial support. This financial management platform totally made sense to us and our client that had deep experience. And the reason was, hey, oncology treatments, they're expensive, and we knew that our patients needed that support. But what we ended up finding through this triangulation process, the health value index, is that's actually not what they needed at all from us. They already got financial support from their oncology nurses or the practice. What they really needed was emotional support. And it might not sound that surprising, but in the spirit of train leaving the station, we were very much able at this early stage, after only 2 months of research, to completely transform what this project was about. It ended up being a platform to help people understand what their condition is, understand how to manage the anxiety and everything in daily management. And what we're seeing from early analytics from this pivot is that people who are actually looking at this content through the website are far more likely to go to brand.com to a specific treatment from an unbranded experience and then through compliance efforts through to a branded effort.
And our last point is easy to explain and easy to use. So we think that both your strategy and your product should have an elevator pitch. And the way that this comes through for us is, from a strategy perspective, a product plan on a page. So this is a one-page document which outlines who are you trying to target, what is the purpose of what you're doing, how does that come to life in your product, and very importantly, how are you measuring the success so that you can optimize that product once you go live in market. And the great thing about this is very much an internal benefit where you have new team members joining, you're trying to socialize your objectives throughout your organization. You can hand someone this sheet of paper and in 60 seconds, they know exactly what your team is doing and why. From a product perspective, the way that this comes to life, we think that this is a great example of some of the work that we did in partnership with Google. So we use their Looker BI tool to analyze clinical trial data for Alzheimer's disease. So as you can see, there's highly sophisticated visualizations that are in this tool, but the way that we built the UI and the UX is extremely intuitive, where we don't need to send somebody to the HCP to train them on how to use the tool. There's not a 100-page documentation for how it works. It's extremely intuitive out of the box. So on the bottom, you can see the sliding time scale where the doctor can look at how the patient's been progressing over time. They can toggle on the left-hand side in between different elements of the patient's profile. They can very quickly switch to other patients that are in the clinical trial. And then we use machine learning where basically it's taking the patient in front of the doctor and finding lookalikes to help recommend different treatment options that have been effective on people that are similar to the patient in front of them. And then also understanding how the biomarkers for Alzheimer's are progressing and what treatments they're best responding to. So we think just a great example where we took an extremely complex disease with an extremely complex set of data and built it into a tool that really anybody can use as soon as they start engaging with it.
So that is our main part of the presentation. Thank you for listening. We want to open this up for questions, and if we run out of time or if you want to ask anything that requires more of a conversation, we're going to be right outside at our booth right after this.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Right, so let's open up for questions. Keep them coming. We're going to start with the first ones we have, because we've got a moment. So you highlighted a number of parts of removing barriers to data. From your point of view, what are the competencies and frameworks that pharma needs to be data-driven for the purpose of our customers?
Well, one of the things that's really common actually is people can tend to be extremely protectionist over their data. So it's actually very difficult to get internal teams to share the data, which is really what you need in order to develop more sophisticated insights. So I say a lot, like when data people walk into a room, people think you're the auditor, but you're actually the therapist. And so it's getting people to just feel more comfortable in sharing that data from like a more social, kind of cultural perspective. We see that a lot. It's very difficult for us to get our hands on the data, particularly when you're working interagency, which, we work with a lot of other companies when we're working with, our pharma clients, and we have to convince our partners to share that data, because ultimately getting your data from a variety of systems together, that is the holy grail. And then the analyses, you can run anything you want on top of that. So it's just getting people to give it to you and putting it together.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add one thing that's incredibly encouraging. We've probably all been to quite a few conferences. I'm not sure if anyone else here has ever seen a conference so focused on data. Clearly, we're recognizing the value of it. So that's a really good sign just in terms of culture changing and recognizing, oh man, we really need to do something about this data. And then the other part is really adopting a product mindset. So just saying the word data-driven is a really great start. How do we start? Granted, we have our own framework, but if it's not our framework, just really making sure what is the value that we're trying to drive from either the business or specifically being patient-centric, and then from there figuring out the solution. It used to be, I have an idea and let's run with this, and we're trying to move way past that and not just take what someone from leadership said is, I have an idea, and move it more to, here's what data is telling us that we should do, and now let's create a solution based on that.
So data. All data is not created equal. Data channels are not all the same. So please give us the million-dollar question. From what you've seen, what learnings can you share again on channel data and insights for pharma that are necessary versus vanity?
Oh, yeah. I understand the last part.
I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Which channels and insights are actually genuinely valuable?
Which channels and insights are genuinely valuable?
I think so from the insights perspective, we very quickly touched on it, but if you remember, Ashley mentioned that we had a program that it's arguably vanity, 100,000 downloads. I mean, that's pretty impressive by pharma standards, I think is fair to agree. But the follow-up on that Ashley mentioned is 3% return visits. Arguably, might not matter for some websites or apps if you only need a one-time engagement, but this was an adherence play. We really need repeat engagement. So rather than the vanity of let's all celebrate just this 100,000 downloads, let's take a hard look and be open and honest with ourselves and see, okay, that 3%, what can we do to improve that repeat engagement?
Yeah, and I would also, to kind of add on to that, so I would say the channel is as valuable as you make it. So basically when we're thinking about like a marketing mix, we start by analyzing basically the personas of who it is that we're trying to aim for. So an example is we did an exercise with biosimilars. So we had 6 target patient groups with different conditions. So we analyzed exactly who those people were, where they absorb their media, what motivates them. And that basically helped us to choose what channel that we should go on, and then also how we should design our content so that it's immediately sticky, to that individual and population. So it's as relevant as basically the data tells you. So you have to do the upfront research because some channels are relevant for some groups and some just aren't. But yeah, it just depends. I would start with a persona. Hopefully that answered.
Whoever asked that, we'd love to keep that
Yeah,
conversation going, and also hear what you feel is vanity versus necessary.
Right, so very quickly for the last one, we've talked a lot on these 2 days about getting medical and commercial and sales to work together and bridging the gap and sitting at the table. So back to the topic of firewall, how should we overcome the challenges associated with this across commercial and medical with structuring a single data platform? And once you answer, I will ask you to solve the Middle East as well.
We should probably take that one to the back.
We are at time, so unless you have a quick answer, that's a conversation.
It wouldn't be quick, but it is an important thing to
It
discuss.
is a very important question.
And thanks for
It's
recognizing
for all of
the
us.
challenge associated. It's a great question, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chair, leave this.
Just give it back at the back.